Welcome to Wednesday Live. I am excited to share my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra Moore, with everyone. Welcome, Cassandra.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So we've known each other for many years, and you are an affiliate coach for Bridge Between. You have your own firm, The More You Know, and which we'll learn about in a little bit. And you're one of those people that I can always reach out to for new insight, another way of looking at things, some tools. And so I'm curious to know, what are some of the things that you get to do now during quarantine that you didn't get to do before? Because, many of us are focused on the things that we don't get to do anymore.
True.
I wonder, what is something that you look forward to?
I have to say that the one thing that most people dislike about quarantine is the isolation. I have to say that I've embraced it because the one thing that I get to do is to emotionally check in with myself. And I think that that is very important in these times because we tend to shy away from talking about feelings and or emotions, but I get to do this with myself.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple exercise.
What do you do? Teach
Yeah,
us so we can do it.
yeah. So I describe what I'm feeling, what I'm concerned about, and I put a name to it, right? So I identify it so that I can be able to manage it.
Yeah.
And I find that it's very helpful because as humans, we carry around so much emotional baggage. And it shows up in our lives, in our work, in our relationships.
Right.
And I'm just grateful that I'm able to use this time, this isolation, to really check in with myself to help me manage through this.
Good for you. Thank you for that. That's a great tip. And I think it's courageous to do that, right? Because it's easier to just stay
Absolutely.
busy and keep running, but to stop, check in, put language to it, make it real, learn from it. I mean, that's a way to
Absolutely.
harness your energy, which is the topic we get to talk about today. One of the things that you just eat for lunch is like energy management and how to bring the most out of yourself and others. And I think that's such an awesome thing because unlike time, energy is something that we can create more of if we're thoughtful about it. So our topic today is managing energy and finding opportunity in crisis. Just so relevant, so relevant. So you are on a mission, right? You are very clearly designed your business to fulfill a mission. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I think about my purpose, it also ties to my passion, Shannon. And I believe that my mission is to make a difference for my clients by utilizing transformational core energy coaching. And core energy coaching is designed to help liberate my clients towards achieving their goals and having them move away from self-defeating or self-limiting behaviors. And I do this by utilizing a 3-step coaching framework, which is the acronym for ACT. The first thing I do with core energy coaching is I assess the who. A lot of times we're coaching clients, there's always the need for, hey, fix the problem. But before we can fix the problem, we need to become familiar with the who the client is and what the client's needs are. The next step of the process is to clarify and create. So I gain clarity on what their goals are and develop a coaching plan. And then finally, through the coaching engagement, the transform phase is where I facilitate client insights and learning and partner with my client to help convert that learning into action. So yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about.
Yes, yes. And a big part of it is this energy, like you just said, it's that core energy coaching. And you've taught me a new way to define energy. And I'd love for you to share that with everybody who's joining us today.
Yeah, so it's helpful to talk about energy as it's defined by Bruce D. Schneider, who is the owner and founder of IPEC Coaching, which is the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. He is also an ICF Master Certified Coach. And Bruce's work around core energy and energy leadership is a completely different way than other executive coaching models, because it starts with something so basic yet misunderstood, and it's energy, right? Yeah. It's at the core of everything that we do, right? So what we believe is that all people, no matter where they are in their life, they're continually experiencing energy, and they can experience it in one or two ways. There is catabolic energy, and there is anabolic energy. Okay. And when you think about the differences between those two types of energy, right? Catabolic is energy that is destructive. It's energy that drains you. It breaks down. And then when you think of anabolic energy, which is on the flip side of that, that's more fueling energy. The energy that is constructive, it's positive. And in Bruce's work around the 7 levels of energy, the work that I do is I'm taking my clients through the 7 levels of energy and introducing them to the catabolic levels and the anabolic levels, and the difference between the two and how it shows up. Okay. Or physically shows up for them as leaders. Okay. And so once they're in, I'm sorry.
Toggle between them throughout a given day?
Oh, absolutely. A person's energetic makeup is a combination of those 7 levels of energy. Okay. And some may lean more into one energy level than the other. So there is a such thing as a primary energy level and a secondary. But the key is to understand what your energy makeup is when things are normal for you, and then what your energy makeup is when you're under stress, because the two dynamics are so vastly different. Yes. And that's where the greatness of this work comes in. Totally. is helping my leaders become self-aware that they recognize this and can identify the triggers, but then choose a different response. So they shift their energy so that they're showing up in a more productive, effective way.
So what you're saying is that there are 7 levels of energy, and it's not contingent on the situation or the circumstance. Like, for example, here we are in a global pandemic with this virus, COVID-19. So regardless of that, we have a choice in what level we respond with.
Exactly, right? So how do you choose to show up, especially knowing the work around these 7 levels of energy? How are you going to choose to show up, right? You can choose to show up as a victim and suffer through it, or you can choose to show up as an opportunist, meaning looking at the opportunity in the situation.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great reminder. And that we have our setbacks and that we're human, so sometimes we aren't our best selves, but to know that we have choice and that these energy levels have benefits to us, right? When we're in more of that anabolic, those positive. And there are influencers on our energy. Like, what are some of those influencers?
Yeah, so when you think about how your energy can be impacted, good, bad, or indifferent, there are influencers like spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, social, and environmental. And in any given one of these situations, your energy can be impacted catabolically or anabolically. So when you think about the mental influence on energy, let's say you're overworked, you're trying to multitask, and you're trying to meet a deadline. Well, that can have a catabolic effect on your energy. versus using your mental energy to maybe meditate and slow down, think, give yourself time to think through whatever project or work that you're working on, right? So there's a difference between how the anabolic and catabolic comes into play with the different influences on one's energy. In fact, Shannon, I was fortunate enough to sit in on a presentation by Meredith Parfait, who's the CEO of Raveyard Group, and she shared her work around crisis energy, which aligns so nicely with the work that I'm doing with my clients around energy leadership. And Meredith's whole concept around this work is that she believes that all people are inevitably going to go through some type of suffering. And she also believes that we have the ability to survive this suffering in a transformative and meaningful way. And that really is what her work around crisis energy is about.
Yeah. So again, not about the circumstance, but about the response and the beliefs about that, and including the belief that you have the power, the resilience, right? The strength to leverage whatever is going on for you. Did you get a chance to meet her during the pandemic? Is this a recent event?
Yeah, like this happened, this recording was in April. So it was it was so relevant and timely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you must have been like mind blown seeing the connection between her work and your work, right? And how
you know me too well, Shannon. You know me too well.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very excited about it.
That's awesome. So teach us a little bit about what you learned from her.
So what Meredith talks about with crisis energy is that, when we go through crisis, it generates a tremendous amount of energy for us. And it can leave an enormous change in the wake, right? Because crises within itself are so complex. And one of the studies that Meredith shared with us was a 2017 study from McKinsey that talked about how when leaders are receive training around crisis management, it's really around how to manage communication around the crisis, which really is only a part of the broader response. Sure. But when you think about how crisis energy feels, it's painful across every dimension of the human experience. So when you think about those dimensions, the mental, the psychological, the social, the economical aspect or dimension of the human experience, this is really what it feels like. So when you think about leaders being able to manage crisis communications, it's always about what to do versus less about what to do and the impact on the human experience.
Right.
And I like that she really talked about that. And she also broke it down that there are 3 potential outcomes of crisis energy.
Wow.
We can either bury it, let it detonate, or we can harness this energy. So when we think about what happens when we bury this type of energy, we ask ourselves, right, what does that look like? So picture what happens when you cover up something or you hide it or you don't, kind of let it out, like how you feel, right? So when you're burying it, we do so in times to avoid pain. And what happens when we do that is that, it shows up like anger or impulsive behavior.
Disconnection.
And this is how it's showing up. So she talked about what that looks like and the questions that we should ask ourselves if we find ourselves really in a crisis and we're burying energy, that we should really be asking ourselves questions about, where am I behaving unconsciously out of fear? What might I be avoiding doing, feeling, or saying about this experience, right? That's another, we kind of bury it because we don't want to talk about it. We're avoiding it.
Yep.
And or what will happen if I acknowledge how painful this situation really is? So that kind of ties back to my whole thing about emotional check-in, right?
Yes.
Acknowledging it, naming it. It's painful, but naming it so that we can manage it. So yeah, when she talked about that, I was, kind of so elated to show the comparison and the similarities between crisis energy and the work that I'm doing with, with my leaders around energy management.
Totally. So that's burying it. What does detonating it look like? Not that I don't know.
Yeah.
Personally.
Think about it. What happens when you shake a soda bottle up with the cap on and you let it off? It explodes, right? So when we detonate crisis energy, we're doing it to release pressure. Where the energy explodes and it looks like self-destruction. It looks like some type of impulsive behavior like overeating or excessive drinking or overspending. It could look like rage or blame. And because we can't contain energy forever, it inevitably will explode. And that, according to Meredith, leads you into deeper crisis.
Yes.
So when you think about that, one of the things that she, she suggests is that the types of questions that you ask yourself when you're found at this stage of detonating crisis energy is, what's triggering me, right? What's triggering me during this crisis?
Right.
Where might I be placing blame? And how do I react when I feel the pressure of this crisis?
Yeah. Right.
Right. And then she goes on to, really talk about, really sitting with that for a moment. And it's a good time to reflect, because as I thought about those questions, it made me reflect about, like, what did I believe to be the greatest challenge in this pandemic, right? And we can all ask ourselves that, right?
Sure.
What has been the greatest challenge in this pandemic? How might we be experiencing the energy of crisis? And how have we buried or detonated crisis energy in the past few weeks? And when I sit back and I think about that, I realize that and recognize that it does happen. And I've been seeing it with my clients that I'm working with.
Sure.
Right? They are leaders in organizations. They're trying to figure it out for themselves personally, for their families, but they're also trying to figure it out for their teams.
Yes.
And this is real. Like, this is happening. So I was just so grateful to be able to draw the correlation between, this work.
Because your leaders need to put the mask on of certainty and confidence and giving people security, but they get to be themselves when they're with you. So they get to really say, here's what I'm feeling, and here's what's scaring me, and here's where I feel incompetent. So I think you helping them to see that is a outlet, or that is a, consequence to crisis energy, but that's not the only choice they have, right? Because then you talked about harnessing as another thing.
Right. Yes. And the harnessing piece is cool, but I do want to touch on one thing though, Shannon, because you brought up a great point about how my clients show up with me, where they're in a safe place and they can share whatever. But I also talk to them when they're in this state of crisis to talk about self-care, right? Because it's the one thing that always seems to fall at the bottom of the totem pole. Right. I mean, I'll even admit, right? I can tend to overwork and not, remember to care for myself. But in these times, it is so important. And I really like to make sure that I check in with my clients and ask them, what are you doing to care for you during this time? Like, you have to answer for so many people, for your families, your teams, but what are you doing for you, right? And in this time of heightened stress, if we don't take care of ourselves first, then we can't be there for those who rely on us for support.
Right.
It's like putting your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. So, you know, I really like to focus on the self-care and share a bit about how might we want to care for ourselves and our needs during this time, right? Some of the things that I find myself doing more of, in addition to my emotional check-ins, I meditate throughout the day often. I like to physically move. Even if I can't get out to enjoy nature for a walk, I will pick myself up to move. Like, there is some psychology in actually moving yourself that helps to relieve that stress, right? Because that's the whole key with self-care, is to help relieve the stress. So, I mean, there's so many things. I read. Sometimes I just look out the window and enjoy the beautiful day, and, you know, just think about all the things that I might be grateful for. All of those really help me with self-care.
Yeah, and I think the categories that you mentioned earlier about mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, relational, right? Those are things that we could think about, like, what could I do today to make a deposit in the relationship account, to reach out to a colleague and catch up, or, you know, in the emotional account, like, what can I access that would make me laugh and just feel good, or joy. And so I think, you know, you're giving us some really good food for thought, is that self-care can help you to, you know, I guess, find resource to manage the crisis and manage emotions.
Build yourself back up, right? It's almost like building yourself back up. And it segues nicely into Meredith's final point about how to harness, right? This crisis energy. And that happens in real time, right? But it also takes great effort, patience, and practice, because according to Meredith, we harness the energy of crisis when we assign meaning to an experience. And that meaning has to come from within. So when you think about, what does that look like? Meredith shares that we can look at what priorities are we setting for ourselves. And when we set those daily priorities, you know, make sure there's 2 or 3 that we want to strive for. And when we set those priorities, it helps to eliminate noise. And it also aligns with being aspirational, and they also serve as an anchor. She also talks about establishing small reminders to quiet the internal noise. And when I think about the internal noise, I think about, you know, our little gremlins, our little inner critic, right? Those are the things that are very catabolic in nature, that will move us away from wanting to harness, you know, energy to do good. And she also talks about learning something, getting curious, which, you know, we do as coaches all day.
Constantly,
She also made a point about do creative things without purpose. And then, you know, avoiding the fear trap, and really just focusing on meaning. You know, she just brought up some really great points. And, you know, her work, you know, and sitting through her presentation really made me reflect about myself and how I manage my energy to be successful during the current times, and how I help my clients do the same. I also read a book this year at the beginning of January, because that's when the author wrote the book. His name is Rich Bello.
Oh my gosh. He wrote a book in the pandemic?
Yes, he did. And guess what he called it? Crisis-tunity. Crisis and opportunity in one word. I was like, oh man.
We have new vocabulary now, Cassandra. Crisis-tunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I love about this book, outside of the relevant timeliness of the book, I like the pieces, the key takeaway for me was about finding opportunity in crisis.
Okay.
And Rich firmly believes that in order for us to find opportunity in crisis, we have to change our mindset to view crisis as a potential opportunity.
Totally.
So the section of his book that I found most relevant, what that ties back to this discussion, were around the behavioral patterns that most effective leadership mindsets can apply during times of crisis. And he talks about these behavioral patterns. There were 9 of them, 9 behavioral patterns, and how this mindset can help you with, managing your life, managing your work, managing, anything that you're going through. Sure. But there were 5 that I really thought were so relevant, because what Rich believes is that in order to be able to quickly and effectively respond during times of crisis, it involves you being prepared in advance and engaging in a given situation head on. So he talks about a proactive mindset, right? Quick to respond, right? It's like the early bird gets the worm. So if something's going on, you notice that during the pandemic, everyone figured out, okay, how am I going to pivot from operating in a face-to-face environment to now doing things online, right?
Yes.
I started doing webinars. You have Wednesdays live. Like we're being proactive to provide a service for a demand, right? But we're moving quickly, and so that we don't lose or miss out on the opportunity.
Sure.
The other behavior that he talks about is grit. When we go through crisis, we are presented with a unique set of obstacles, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this. And we also are likely to face failures during a crisis. Sure. But grit is crucial because it allows you to remain determined and persevere despite the challenge that the crisis situation is going to throw at you.
Sure.
Right? That, in a nutshell, that's the grit.
That's awesome. That's like we talked about before, about beliefs and meaning. Like if you view the crisis as having it gives you access to growth and
absolutely.
Like I'm equating what you're saying, Cassandra, to like lifting weights. Like you're like, you're lifting weights and it's stressing your muscle, but it's growing your muscle, right?
Yes, it is.
Put the weights down, and that's the self-care, that, restoration part of it. But, if we're going to look at this grittiness as opportunity, and I kind of think that at the end of all of this, God willing, everybody's on the other side of this.
Exactly.
But I think you could be on the other side, like bloody and beat up, or you could be on the other side, stronger, more mindful, kind of more prepared. And that's what
absolutely.
I'm saying is just
absolutely. Like, and I like the way that you tied that, because as you were talking about lifting weights and then, putting weights down, I'm visualizing it in my mind. Great analogy. So thank you. Sure. For kind of correlating that there. The other thing Rich talks about is courage, right? So we have to be able to overcome our fears. Like usually when people are, when we're faced with a crisis, the first thing is, oh wow, what's going to happen next? This can happen, that can happen, right? And then that all leads to all the fears and the pains. And if we tend to focus on that, right, that's catabolic energy, right? Totally. But if you're courageous, you know that there are decisions that you're going to have to make in order to get through this, right? So showing up courageously is one of the behaviors he talks about. He also,
I love that brave, not perfect, that Brene Brown says.
Oh, yes.
On point with what you're saying. It's like, just show up anyway. Like,
that's right.
Be prepared, and
that's right.
Not going to be perfect, but you're going to be courageous. I think that's awesome. Thanks for that.
That's right. Yeah. And then, finally he talks about the ability to be able to communicate, not just your ideas, your plans, but failure to communicate effectively will prevent you from seizing the opportunity in crisis. And then finally talks about focus, because, you know, a crisis can be, you know, time sensitive. Being laser focused about what you're trying to achieve, whatever those goals are, is also critical. So this crisis-tunity mindset, I found it to be so powerful, but I also realized that it can't be developed overnight, right, Shannon?
Yeah.
It's going to require some persistence, some determination, and you know, if I put on that crisis-tunity mindset, if I wear that like a hat, and then I, you know, ask the question, right? I'll ask everyone, you know, viewing this webinar to ponder the question, you know, what good has come from, you know, this pandemic, this crisis that we're facing? What opportunities, personally or professionally, have you taken advantage of? Right? If we could sit with that question for a bit and think about that. But recalling the behaviors that I just shared, right? What do you think about as you look at finding opportunity in crisis?
Yeah, I think that's a great self-reflective question for everybody to, you know, pour into and give themselves some quiet time to consider and maybe even journal about it.
That's a great
pour that out of you and get more clear, because those are some of the opportunities that this has created, is to look at what good have you made from this. And I also think, on the operative word of choice, that even if we haven't handled it well in general lately or predominantly, we can choose now to look at the crisis-tunity mindset and say, okay, starting today, because I think sometimes there's a lot of shame in our past choices, or maybe, you know, they haven't really framed it this way before. And now that they're getting this new insight to say, okay, starting now, I'm going to lean into the crisis-tunity mindset, recognizing that we're not going to be perfect, but it's a practice. Awesome. So speaking of practice, you are a very disciplined, intentional person and leader. And the more you know your organization, the more you know is really, when you talked about these other authors, you've shared their beliefs. You're like, they believe this, they think this, and from that belief, they've created things. So tell us some of your beliefs and some ways that you practice what you preach.
Absolutely.
Not the kind of person that's going to tell you to do something and not do it.
This is true.
Very
you know me well.
Willing to walk the walk. So tell us a little bit about some of your best practices.
Sure. Yeah. So if I wear my crisis-tunity mindset hat, and I think about the things that I can share with, you know, this audience, I like to listen, learn, and grow. I think that there's always an opportunity to listen, learn, and grow. And I've been able to take advantage of doing those things during this time. So in addition to learning new skills, upgrading my personal and professional capabilities, you know, taking advantage of free online courses, and anything that I can attend, a leadership conference, anything that's going to help me learn. I'm also taking the opportunity to listen. It is so important. We don't do it often, but when I listen to my clients or listen during conversation, it allows me to be more curious as a coach, to be able to ask those relevant questions that creates meaningful dialogue. And, you know, to me, when you do, you know, the listen and learn, that's where the growth comes in. I encourage people to catch up on reading, especially leadership development books that are aligned to your industry or your career. The other thing that I'm very big on is, you know, even though I like my moments of isolation, I talk to people. And it's important for human connection. We don't have face-to-face anymore, but what we do have, we have the virtual mediums, we have the telephone. We can still talk to people, tap into our network, connect with people to learn. You can learn about more about them, learn about an industry, learn about a company, learn about anything that you want to know, but just keeping that line of connection open, touching base with those that you haven't talked to in a while. You know, I try to attend as many virtual coffees as I can, or networking events. It's just important to stay connected to my network. My network is very important to me, and I think you know this, Shannon. So I talk to people. I love doing that.
And that's part of the growth and learning also. Like you sharing your ideas, you're getting new insights, you're just touching base. It's probably also good for the emotional energy, the mental energy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, good.
It's that whole anabolic, right? Fueling. That fuels me. Yeah.
Then you're talking to people and you're really hearing their story, and you're the kind of person that gets right into it too, like where people could open up and be willing to share how they're really feeling and experiencing.
Yeah. You know, a lot of times, you know, the other thing that I'm, you know, taking time to do and finding the opportunity to do is to continue to manage my online presence. Because you know how we talk about our brand, right? Our brand is about who we are and how we show up. And when we were in the, you know, pre-COVID, we were able to do so, you know, visually, like showing up. Right now, it's all online. So, you know, how do you do that? You know, make sure that you're kind of like leaning in, you know, with certain social networks, and being sure that, you know, you're showcasing, you know, your abilities and your thought leadership, you know, like, you know, checking in on LinkedIn. Also, I think some things that others can do that people necessarily don't always think about is you can still show up as a leader during these times. If you're working with someone who's, and I know this is happening a lot, there are people who are struggling with this whole work from home, and they can't quite adapt or adjust, but you can be the leader and be the person who helps make it easier for them. You know, by providing best practices about working from home, doing anything to make work from home more productive and make it more productive and enjoyable. And really, when you step up during these types of uncertain times and really show yourself as a leader, it's really scoring a big win for you with your personal brand. You know, there are so many ways to do that. And, you know, the other thing that's big for me, Shannon, is, you know, going back to emotions, is this whole piece with our current times, keeping humanity front of mind, and showing empathy, which, you know, it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes, even if you've not personally gone through the experience. There are those of us who struggle with this, but if we could learn how to show empathy, whether it's understanding what someone might be going through as a result of this pandemic or the civil unrest in our nation right now, just showing a sense of humanity speaks volumes. And for me, I want to make sure that, you know, that I'm doing that. And
I think that's great, Cassandra, because I think if we're witnessing someone's catabolic energy, which we probably all have, it's easy to judge those people, or it's easy to be critical or blame or what have you. But for us to approach it with the sense of empathy and humanity and say, you know, what might be going on in that person's life that I'm not aware of, and how can I help them, and how can I be supportive versus judgmental. And I think that's a really good call to action for us as we're approaching these things, because I think it actually works for both sides of the relationship. It's better for your energy to be kind and generous, and it's better for the individual who's demonstrating that catabolic energy, that they're being met with receptivity and empathy versus blame and, you know, ignoring it.
No, you definitely, you hit it on the you hit the nail on the head, Shannon. Very true.
So any other tips? You got some?
So the other one is around flexibility and patience. Just being flexible, right? I think, it's a word, but like, do we really think about what flexibility looks like? How you show how flexible you are. I think that a lot of us might exude that now with, being flexible with having to figure out your new normal of working at home
Sure.
and
Yeah, you're
showing your
managing things.
teams, right? The flexible leader you can be,
Mm-hmm.
and being there for your team. And then, there's that whole heaping dose of patience, right?
Yes.
I think that this pandemic has tested that for all of us.
Yes, it has.
We have been patient at a time when we're all pretty low on patience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, having patience, being optimistic about our economy, our job market, our times, that it will bounce back, understanding what companies and organizations and leaders and people are going through, really understanding that waiting and being patient can be tough, but exuding this really goes a long way to help with stress management.
Mm-hmm.
And stress management for me always ties back to self-care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right back to that. I mean, that's
yeah.
such an important reminder to us. So when we're thinking about self-care and self-reflection, like what are some key questions that we could ask ourselves, even just in the privacy of our own minds or to journal? I mean, what are some self-reflection questions that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about everything that we've talked about, right, Shannon, with energy and energy
Yeah.
management and what it looks like when it's in crisis and then finding opportunity in crisis, I would say ask yourself these questions. One, how do you want to show up?
Yeah.
How you show up says so much more about you than the person who is receiving whatever it is you're putting out there. The other thing I would say is, if you look back 10 years from now, right?
Yeah. 2030.
What will make you feel like you managed this crisis well?
Mm-hmm.
Or what would you want to be remembered for during this crisis?
Mm.
What would make you feel proud, even if this crisis ends badly for you or your business?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's really taking it up a stance, and all those questions tie back to thinking anabolically,
Yeah.
exuding a different level of energy,
Mm-hmm.
even in responding to these questions.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, because I know, like, for some people, that first question of like, what would you say in 10 years? Some people might think I survived,
Right.
got through it. And you're suggesting that we then go to like, what would make you proud? And, how do you, like, what difference do you want to have made? And what would be something that's a highlight, even if you personally suffered greatly? And I think that levels up the questioning and the introspection, because like I said, it's not too late. Starting today, you could invest your time and energy into something that no matter what the circumstance, you would be proud that you were engaged with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then that gives us purpose and meaning and direction. And
Always.
back originally about your mission, you're on a
Yeah.
mission, which gives you that perseverance through the setback.
And purpose is so important, Shannon, because at the end of the day, every decision we make, every situation we face, right, we have choice. And the key with energy management is, which option or which choice are you going to make? Because through that self-awareness, right, of understanding that you have choice, it really helps you, it really helps you get there.
Yeah.
It really does.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, that's such a great way for us to close, is to recognize that we have choice.
Yes.
And that these are you know, this is the spectrum that you talked to us about tonight, is like the highs and the lows, and how do we engage with those mindfully, thoughtfully, and skillfully, so that we, you know, show up on purpose and we get to be more of the person that we really are. You know, it's not even just the person you hope to be, it's the person you really are. So get
That's
out of
right.
your own way and, you know, give yourself these good questions as food for thought. I love that.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing your wisdom so generously with us.
And thank you for allowing me to talk about my favorite topic, energy management. I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Oh, my pleasure, Cassandra. I'm grateful for you.
All right. Take
Be well.
care.
Bye.